All right. Hello, folks, and welcome. My name is Karen Goodenough. I'm Executive Director at NASW Minnesota, and I'm thrilled to have you all with us this morning, or I guess it's midday now, for our webinar on Minnesota's 2020 licensure laws, what's changed, what's new, and what you need to know. Kate and Jen, can you go ahead and mute yourselves? I'm hearing just a little feedback to myself here. As you all see on the screen with me this morning, we have Jen Rick, who is our board president for NASW Minnesota. And Jen will be handling all of our Q&A today. In just a second, she'll be jumping off here after I explain how our Q&A is going to work. And then we have Kate Zacher-Pate, who is Executive Director of the Board of Social Work. Welcome, Kate. Thanks so much for being with us today and doing this jointly with NASW. All right, so folks, just a couple of little housekeeping things. One is we have just over 800 people registered for our webinar today. So first off, thank you all for joining us. Clearly, licensure is kind of an important gig for most of us, and people want to know what's new and what's different and what's changing and all of that and be in the know. And we had hoped by hosting this webinar that it would become very clear to folks what's new, what's different. I think by the time you're done this morning, you will have a really good sense of what's different and what you can look for starting in August. A couple of little things about that. Also, this webinar will be recorded. It'll be available for free on our YouTube channel. So if you have to jump off at some point and miss a chunk of it, you can always come back and watch it there. You can also share the link with all of your friends and colleagues and folks if you'd like to. In addition, just a note, and we'll talk about this today as well, but all of your continuing ed during this next cycle of renewal can be done via independent learning. So you can count the hours, whether you're with us in person or whether you are watching it at your leisure on YouTube later. So either way will count for you as well. A couple of little tech notes here over on the side of your screen and someplace on your screen, I should say, it looks different a little bit for different folks. There's a place that says either chat or questions. And in those boxes, there's a place for you to note some questions. If you have a question for us, you can jot it into the questions tab and it will go to Jen and she will filter through those and send things our way. As well as Jen will post things in there like answers to things. Right now, it talks a little bit about how you get your CEUs and that sort of thing. So we will be emailing the CEU certificates and evaluation after the webinar. GoToWebinar tracks everyone that watches it. That's why you had to do that brief little additional step in your registration process. So we'll know who's watched it already. We'll send out your materials and everyone else can track it personally, and we will, at the end of the webinar today, we'll be talking a bit about independent learning. Kate will catch me on that. We've changed the language, so I have to change my language, independent learning. But we're going to talk today about how you can track your independent learning credits to make sure that you're sort of collecting all the things that you need to collect just in case the board asks for them. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Jen will come back on and we'll jump her little face up on the screen there when there's a question from the audience. She will call through those, as I said, and either answer things herself if she feels like it's something quick she can answer, or she will jump on and ask your question for you. We, at the end of our session this morning, we have a bunch of slides to walk you through all kinds of different pieces of information. You're welcome to ask a clarifying question as we go, but wait till we've covered everything to make sure that your question isn't answered somewhere else in the slides if it's something that's not exactly pertaining to what we're talking about at that moment. At the end of the session, probably the last 20 minutes to half hour, depending on how fast we get through all of this, we'll have for Q&A. So there'll be time definitely at the end for you to ask some more questions. The board is also listening to all of your questions and jotting down your things that folks are asking about, and especially things that they hear over and over, and they're developing some Q&A, FAQ documents to continue to bring that information to folks in an easy to find way. So that will all be on the board's website after our session. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Are you ready, Kate? Okay, fantastic. So today we're talking about Minnesota's 2020 licensure laws. What's changed, what's new, what you need to know. So before we get into all of the nitty gritty of all of the changes, I wanted to just share a little bit about the difference between us at NASW Minnesota and Kate and the Board of Social Work, because there's lots of questions about that, and we both get them all the time. We get people that show up at our offices looking for the other one, as well as calling us and asking questions, and we send them to one another all the time. So just to clarify a little bit this morning, Kate's going to go first and talk a little bit about what is the Board of Social Work and help everyone understand what their mission is and what they're all about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen. And before I jump into this, I just really want to say how excited the board is and how appreciative we are that all of you are joining us to learn about these really important changes. And I can't call out enough how much the board appreciates the partnership and the collaboration that we're really being able to accomplish with NASW and the professional organizations. I mean, we're a system, we're the regulatory system, and we just find that everybody really has the end goal in mind to really try to work together to ensure that all of us are really at high standards so that the citizens of Minnesota are really served in a competent, ethical manner. You know, and so just really wanted to shout that out. We're so appreciative. Staff and board is excited. And that really kind of is a perfect segue into talking a little bit more about what is the board, you know, and I know that everybody has different interactions, experiences with the board, with NASW. And, you know, essentially the board is not the professional association. We are the regulatory agency in Minnesota, an executive branch agency with a governance model of 15 board members who really help to direct policy, direct some of our staff work, do the strategic planning, and then the staff sort of takes it from there. You know, so again, to the extent that you interact with the board, you're very likely interacting with staff. As many of you know, regulation in Minnesota for social workers is maybe, what would I say? Maybe we're sort of in the teenage development cycle. Regulation here in Minnesota has been around only since 1987, so 30 some years, still relatively young. But I think that the board and the profession just continues to have really wonderful growth, continued definition, and clearly continued importance in the communities in which we live and serve. You may know another, I think a wonderful statistic is that in the state of Minnesota and also across the country, licensed social workers make up 75% of the mental health workforce. I mean, social workers are an important and formidable force, and so we are always very excited about that. Again, the bottom line is regulatory agency, we are about protecting the public. That is the end goal, that is the overarching goal, and as you can see on your screen, you know, how we do that is that we license qualified social workers, we establish and enforce those ethical practice standards, we do investigation and resolution of complaints, and we provide information and education to the public. I mean, the board really tries to be very collaborative in the work that we do, and we're very excited and very proud to be serving Minnesota in this capacity.
Great. And I think, Kate, you'd already gone through some of these statutory kind of responsibilities of the board. In terms of the role of NASW Minnesota, so as Kate alluded to, so we are the professional association for social workers in Minnesota. So whereas Kate and the board are about protecting the public, they're the government agency, their revenue comes from social work licensure fees, their job is to enforce statutes that we're talking today. NASW is about serving social workers. We're a nonprofit. Revenue comes from our membership dues and our events. And really, our mission is to support and inspire and equip social workers. That's our core. So we do that through continuing ed, through our days at the Capitol, through our policy work, through all kinds of events that we do to support the profession, and also in speaking for the profession and working on behalf of the profession in all sorts of different ways. Whereas really the board, that's not the board's role. And I get a lot of questions from people pushing back on me saying, why isn't the board doing more about XYZ? And I say to people all the time, that's not their job. Their job is the public by licensing us. That's it. That's it. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Kate?
No, I think, I mean, that really is a very sort of clear and succinct distinction in our roles and our missions, you know, but again, I guess I really would highlight that, you know, as I said earlier, I really think we all have the same end goal in mind. It is really to help ensure that we've got qualified social workers serving all of our citizens and communities in the state. I mean, the board really values the partnership that we experience with the professional organizations. It makes, makes it collectively easier to do our work.
Yeah, and to that end, I want to say to folks, it's important for people to know too that the board does not act on behalf of social workers from a distance without the input of social workers. So board is, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, the board members of the Board of Social Work are 2/3 social workers. In addition, the board has an advisory committee, which is made up of representatives from NASW and all of the other social work professional associations in Minnesota. I happen to chair that committee currently, and I'm also on the Legislative and Rules Committee, which we'll talk about in a moment, that worked on these changes. And so the board has been really good about engaging social workers in the conversation all the way along, all the time. And I also want to highlight that all Board of Social Work meetings are public meetings. You can watch them online, folks. They're not the most exciting thing. Sorry, Kate. And they do go quite long sometimes. And there is a time in there built in for public comment. So if you have something that you'd like to share with the board, you can always share it during public comment. You can also, if you're an NASW member, you can reach out to me and I'm happy to share your thoughts with the board as well. I do a lot of that. So there are lots of ways that the board connects with social workers and uses the voice of social workers. Several of your staff as well are social workers. So important for people to know that as well. All right, so in terms of changes, yeah, go ahead.
Karen, might I just jump in just to give a plug for our best communication tool ever. We use a software called GovDelivery. It is a subscription email service. And again, we have really set as a priority communicating with stakeholders, with licensees, applicants, as Karen said. And our primary tool, which is free and easy, is for you to go to the website and sign up using your email. It's a subscription service. We are pushing out newsletters regularly, press releases, all sorts of information to stay connected with folks. And our subscription service currently is probably at about 3,000, which is good. We've been using this medium for maybe a year and a half or so. But again, I would really, really encourage you to sign up, and particularly to sign up now with these changes going into effect, because that is our primary communication tool to communicate with the 16,000 plus social workers we have. It's effective, it's free, it's easy. So if you would do that as well, it's another great way to stay connected with us. In addition, our website.
I love to just hear you, Kate. I have to stop there and say I haven't heard the plus 16,000 number yet. I know we were been running over 15,000 for the last couple of years, but wow, so reached over 16, so welcome to our new social workers. Our new number. That's exciting. Folks, in order to register to get that that newsletter from the board, all you have to do is go on to their website. The link's at the end of our slides here, but if you look up Minnesota Board of Social Work, the first thing that'll pop on your screen is a little box saying, do you want to add your email address and get our .gov or gov delivery service? And it's super easy, and they're really good about not spamming us. They just send us the updates that we need to know. So I would highly encourage people to go ahead and do that. All right, so before we jump into what's changed because of our legislative changes, I want to make sure everyone hears one more time, if you haven't already, that there are 3 variances that the board passed as of March 20th in light of COVID. So these affect all licensees, or social work licensees in Minnesota, and are good basically for the next couple of years. So the details are on the slide there. So from February 29th of 2020 through February 28th of 2022, there's no limit on the number of independent learning hours you can do for your required continuing education. And there's no limit on your supervision hours that you can do via telephone or eye-to-eye electronics, so remotely. So all of your supervision can be done remotely, and all of your continuing ed can be done through independent learning.
Mm-hmm.
The third change there is that licensure applications for every level, the close date on those was extended by 6 months. So whereas normally you'd have a year from when you apply to, you'd have a year to complete all of the required pieces of licensure and have it be valid before you'd have to reapply. They've added another 6 months, assuming that there are some glitches in along the way potentially. So just giving people some extra time to apply.
Karen, if I might, if I could just jump in and clarify that last bullet just a little bit. The extended 6-month period really is specific to applicants who aren't able to finish an application within that 1-year period based on the Pearson VUE exam closing, those centers being closed. Mm-hmm. That was really the impact of the COVID situation that the extension was really geared for. Mm-hmm. And other than that, we are really not hearing very many applicants needing to request the 6-month extension. And okay. For those of you may know as well, beginning May 1st, the testing sites have been open and they are at pretty high capacity. We are not seeing interruptions in testing dates. We're not seeing real delays there. We are issuing licenses, we are getting transcripts, and we are also issuing temporary licenses. So again, we are really doing our best to keep up with this high period demand, but we're not seeing the delays at the time, you know, that this was really approved in the beginning of March. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's pretty specific to exam delays.
And folks, that's something that NASW has been working on across the country. I've been working on it for our state, and as well as execs across the country have been working with ASWB and Pearson VUE and our local licensing boards around licensure exams. In Minnesota, there have been some moments, I would say, where things got a little testy, where people were not able to register when they wanted to, when it felt like test dates were months out because they had closed some of the test centers. But that has not been the ongoing case in Minnesota. In Minnesota, they've added some test centers. They were able to add capacity at several of their test centers. So I would hear for a chunk of time like, ooh, you know, I wasn't able to get a spot in a couple months, but then they tried again and were able to get in at a different testing center. So some were having to drive further or pick maybe a date location that that maybe wasn't the ideal, but generally people have been able to register, sign up for their tests. If, however, people can, if there are new problems related to that, I do want people to let either us know that or the board know that so that we're aware. There's been a lot of advocacy work going across the country in different states where they are not as lucky as we are, and many testing sites are closed, and it's been really a shutdown. We've also had a lot of boards across the country who have not been keeping up on their licensee applications and paperwork and that sort of thing. Again, we have not had that problem in Minnesota, Kate, and the board have been doing a great job of keeping up on that. So I'm going to keep us moving. One other thing I want to add to that is that there was a registration process, and I put it in quotes. There was a registration process added through Governor Walz's executive order, which extends now through our peacetime state of emergencies. So that was re-signed again yesterday and will be effective through August 12th. So that registration process is for social workers who are licensed in another state who would like to provide virtual social work services to clients in Minnesota during our peacetime state of emergency. So that has been extended. And basically what this did is allowed people who, several of them that I got calls from were clinicians from across the country who were serving college-age students in states outside of Minnesota who quickly had to move home and they weren't able to transition them to another provider. And so they wanted to provide that continuity of care for the client. And so this registration process has allowed people to, rather than having to go through our entire licensure process, they could register with the Board of Social Work in Minnesota and be able to provide those services. That was not enacted across the country. That was state by state. So there are some states that have it, some that don't. Kate, at the last count, we were at like 150 or so people. Are we still around that number?
I think we are at 230 or 260 and it continues to grow.
Wow. Okay, all right. All right, so we're going to talk about the legislative changes that were made to our licensing laws in 2020 that are effective August 1st, and we'll keep coming back to that. So in terms of how the changes were decided and implemented and why they were proposed, we're just going to go over a few slides of that first to give you all some context. So in terms of legislative process, this stuff does not happen in a week or a month or often even a year. Okay, so these are long time in coming things. So we worked for about 2 years with a committee at the Board of Social Work called the Legislative and Rules Committee, which, as I said before,
so I can see
I've been
Karen's
sitting on. Oh, did I freeze up?
Yep, if you can hear me, Karen, you froze up and you're a little bit choppy.
Okay. Okay, well, hopefully it'll come back now. I don't know. Like, welcome to our world, folks, right? Okay, so we worked for 2 years on this. We worked section by section through each aspect of the licensing law. However, we didn't cover every section. So in a second, I have a slide that shows what we did not touch this time around. But this little timeline just shows you what the process was in terms of timeline. So mostly during the legislative session, so starting February and March, the bills were introduced. They were unanimously passed by the House and Senate. There was no argument at all, no one against it. That's the thing. It was super simple to move through. And then we thought in light of COVID, everything was stalled out and likely wouldn't get passed until next year. However, when the legislature came back into special session, they moved it through unanimously and rather quickly, and it went to the governor for signature. So that happened in May, and the changes will be effective on August 1st. So in terms of stakeholder involvement, I talked about our 3 advisory committee reps. We also, the board also invited public comment. We're very transparent in terms of access to data. All of the whole process and the documents that we worked through are available through the Board of Social Work's website. So if anyone is interested in looking at those, you can still find those. And along the way, we heard from lots of folks that weighed in. This is another reason to stay connected through like the Gov delivery piece. So if there's something that you care about and you hear is happening, we will make sure that folks are aware of it. We had lots of legislative support, and all of our 7 professional social work associations supported it. So again, no real pushback. Everything that is in this legislation was meant to be non-controversial and just really clean it up and add some things that we all care about. It was also a very data-driven process. So I'd like to just make sure people hear that decisions were not made just on the fly, just, oh, it seems like a good idea, but the committee would continually push back on the board and say, okay, why don't you run the numbers on that? How many social workers are actually affected by it? If we raise, the number of clinical clock hours through independent study by X number, will that fix the problems that you've been having? Because the board members would share, like, here's what we're feeling from people, here's what we hear, here are the problems that people run up against in meeting our requirements. And then we'd have them run the data, and they'd come back to another meeting with that data. In terms of goals, again, all of this was meant to be common sense, non-controversial stuff. We were trying to fix some of the mobility and workforce issues that exist. So because licensure is different in every state, when someone gets up and moves to a new state, it can be complicated to get a license. And what we were trying to do is what many other states are trying to do at the same time, which is clean up our laws to make it more in line with what's happening across the country, so that when someone comes to Minnesota and they've had a license for 20 years in another state, we don't put them through the line to meet a bunch of requirements that they've already met in their state. So reducing some of those barriers. In terms of modernizing and simplifying, folks, my guess is most of you are not going to go in and read all of the law, but if you ever did and you tried to compare it to what it used to be, I will promise you it is much easier to find what you're looking for and for things not to be duplicative. So what we found as we went through the law is that many things were said over and over and over again in different places, sometimes in slightly different ways, which also made it difficult for the board to, hold us all accountable to certain things or know exactly what process needed to be and that sort of thing. So it helped them improve some operational efficiencies from that perspective, and also just get rid of some really old, outdated requirements and things, processes that they had to do because of the way the law had been written previously. There were some really important additions to make regarding technology. So as you can imagine, we got licensure in '87. There have been a couple of significant changes to the licensing laws since then, but nothing for 10-ish years. In 10 years, our technology has changed significantly. And so part of what we were trying to do is bring it up to present day in terms of how technology is used. So, so those are some of the additions. We're not going through all of these today. That's why I'm kind of doing these from a high level. We're going to go through the substantive changes that you'll see. But in terms of like all of this small additions, tweaks, changes to language, that sort of thing, you get to read the law if you want to see all of those fun things. And it also had to have no fiscal impact. So nothing we are talking about and nothing that changed in our licensure law has any fiscal impact. There's no change to our licensure fees. There's this has no budget effect for the Board of Social Work. Anytime a licensing board makes changes to their statute, that means that they will have budget changes. They have to put those through during a budget year. So that be next year. So that's also part of the trick in all of this as we decide when to bring things forward to the legislature. We have to do it at the right times. In terms of what's not changing, there is no change to our license types, no change to our scope of practice, and other things that we did not touch yet. I will say yet, but will be coming. The Legislative and Rules Committee will be working in 2020 and 2021 on supervision guidelines, as well as our standards of practice, and looking again at the county exemption. Those are not under discussion today. We could have an entire webinar or probably half day or full day session on any one of those things. So we're holding that for future conversation. If any of you are super passionate about these three things and you're NASW members, I would welcome you to join my licensing committee. So NASW has a licensing committee that works on all of this stuff behind the scenes while I'm simultaneously working with the board, and helps me be prepared with what our thoughts are collectively as an association. So you're welcome to join us in that work if you'd like to dive deeply into it along with us for the next couple of years. All right, what you all came here for today is what's actually changing. So that's what we're going to get to. So first off, all of these changes are effective August 1st. I have a bunch of notes here, Kate, and I'm trying to make sure. basically, and we're going to talk through some of the details today in terms of, you know, if you have to renew still in the next couple of weeks, what that will look like. But really, most people now are, you know, reviewing after or renewing after August 1st. And so all of the changes we're talking about today will be effective August 1st. Now, I'm going to say up front, if you've already completed all of your continuing ed for this year, you've already done your supervision, you've already done your continuing ed for this year, and you renew in August, September, October, whenever it is, you are fine. Nothing we've done has undermined anything that was true before. All of these changes just make it easier. So we've backed off of the number of required hours of clinical CE, for example, things like that. So if you've gotten the full 24 clinical CEs, you're fine. So those of you, if you're worried right up front, like, hey, I need to renew next month and I'm done. Now you don't have to worry. You're in good shape. And if anything, if you're not quite ready yet, this might make it easier for you to meet the requirements. Of what's changing, there are changes related to applications, temporary licenses, continuing ed, renewal processes, alternate statuses, and our board member qualifications. So these are the 6 areas we're going to cover today. So the first one is related to exams. All right. The way that the law reads now is that folks cannot take the exam further than 6 months prior or earlier than 6 months prior to graduation. It's not that we were different from that in the past. It's just that it wasn't clear anywhere. So now, in line with the ASWB requirements across the country, and it's just super clear for students. You don't test until you're 6 months from graduation. It also removes the limit on the number of times applicants can take the exam without special permission. So it used to be that after you'd taken the exam a certain number of times, you had to receive a certain special permission, maybe write a letter, do some different hoops, that sort of thing. And now, if you'd like to take the test multiple times, you are free to do so. I'd also like you to call me before you do take it too many times and take our exam prep course, and let's talk about what's happening there. That's a whole different conversation, but at least we got rid of the extra hoop that people had to jump through. Kate, were there any clarifying things or additions you'd like to make to this exam process stuff?
Well, I guess a couple of things to add, Karen, and first of all, that was a really excellent summary that you did of the process and the goals. And, you know, for all of you who are on today, you can tell that Karen was a very active participant in our committee. I mean, she's got the data and the process in her head. So that was a great explanation. I would just highlight again from the board's perspective, this really was a wonderful opportunity to do some housekeeping and to begin to use plain language to simplify. I mean, one of the best examples is that for the sections on continuing education, I believe there were 7 different sections, and they were duplicative, sometimes different language, as Karen mentioned. We actually got them organized into 2. One for licensees, one for continuing ed providers. So that kind of makes sense. I think that's a great illustration of really one of the goals of our work, just to make the statute and the licensing law less cumbersome, less daunting. So I would encourage you all, you know, to take a look. I have checked with the revisor's office, and the new provisions to our law will not be incorporated in the Social Work Practice Act, which is Minnesota Statute 148E as in egg. They're not going to be incorporated until November, so it's still a little bit cumbersome. But nonetheless, I would really encourage you all to get familiar with the statute. So that was just sort of I guess, an overview or an additional comment. And in terms of the general changes, you know, to Karen's questions, what I might like to add? Very interestingly, when you think about this bright line, August 1st, 2020, the regulations change. And knowing that, the interesting thing, kind of the challenge, is this bright line date one set of regulations turns off, the other one turns on, how does it impact licensees and applicants, particularly for folks who have applications or renewals sort of in mid-process? You know, what happens when the switch turns for something that is started but not quite finished? So I had some consultation with the Attorney General's office, and the decision to implement the best guidance, you know, and sort of, as Karen explained, if you've done all of this, you're in fine form, don't worry, the change won't impact you negatively. So how this really will impact folks is kind of in two ways. As of August 1, anybody who has an open in-process application or renewal, if there's something open and in process as of August 1, when August 1 hits, you get the benefit of these changes because they really are positive benefits for licensees and applicants that allow greater use of technology in continuing ed and in the LIC application process. They afford more flexibility. So again, everybody is equally afforded the positive benefit of the changes in the open in-process application. And then again, one that's probably a little more obvious to the who, how does this impact, what group? Any new application or renewal received on August 1st or forward. Of course, the new regulations apply there. But, you know, just to be clear about that, and Karen's description of that, I think in such a sort of plain language, right to the point. If you've been accruing CE come August 1st, you're just fine. There is nothing more burdensome, nothing new that you have to do. So just, you know, so that I guess folks are reassured in that. And again, in terms of this first slide on the application process, you know, again, another goal here was to be less prescriptive. I mean, to the extent possible, so that the regulations are relevant, that they are less prescriptive, and they remove unnecessary barriers, sort of not all the barriers, because in many ways a barrier can equal a reasonable standard. But again, removing the limit on the number of times somebody can take the examination and the special permission process, it's a way that we can simplify, expedite the process. And with the first bullet here, in terms of not taking the exam more than 6 months prior to graduation, as Karen mentioned, this is not an operational change, but we did call it out in statute so that it was very clear. And at the end of the day, all of the social work regulatory boards across the United States and Canada have to comply with the ASWB exam policy, which is pretty specific about that. So those changes, you know, hopefully will improve things.
Great. We're going to keep moving. Kate, I'm sorry, I just kept moving there and didn't give you a chance to weigh in on everything. I'm just watching our time and know we have a lot of ground to cover. I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. So we'll give you plenty of time to do any closing comments and whatnot at the end. The next section about applications, and there's a couple more regarding applications, is around LICSW 360 clock hours. And this is one of those that doesn't affect everyone. It's only LICSWs, and it's only people who didn't receive all 360 of their clock hours in their graduate program. But for those who are trying to meet that 360 clock hour requirement, we changed a couple things. So one is increasing the number of clock hours people can get through CE from 90 to 120. So this is outside the other CE related things, right?
Correct.
And I have one just related question to that, Kate. So during this 2-year period, because of the variance in place, is it still regular CE that people who are getting clock hours have to receive, or can they do them through independent study in light of the variance?
Karen, if I'm understanding your question, the variance was specific to CE that is required at time of renewal, which is
Renewal.
different from the CE that is required
Okay.
here for the LICSW exam app. I would say those are different.
Those are different. Okay, just to clarify, that's good. And then all 120 CE hours may be completed via independent learning. So there's all things about these 360 clock hours that are very prescriptive. And so there was some changes made so that of the 120 clock hours that could be done via CE. Again, people can take classes like higher ed classes to meet the full 360, and then it doesn't matter. But if you don't get them all in a higher ed program, then they're counted as CE. But then this, Kate, does say that all 120 can be completed by independent learning. That's not because of variance, it's just because of what we changed in this process.
That's
correct?
That's correct, Karen. And, again, and as I'm listening to you, what is very interesting, these recommendations and changes were approved by the board way before COVID.
Oh, right,
and
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the whole point here, the rationale was really to give applicants more flexibility. And again, quite frankly, as you said earlier, it was to really acknowledge the quality of electronic learning. When these laws went into effect, electronic learning was brand new and emerging.
Right.
And so, again, it's one of those things to sort of make the regulations relevant and modern. So the board and the committee thought that this was a very reasonable change.
Yeah. The one on the slide that I am most excited about has to do with repealing that post-test requirement for the clinical clock hours. So it's one of those things that we got a ton of questions about, and was always difficult for people who were trying to receive them. So those of you who haven't had this requirement, just a side note that those who were trying to meet the 360 clock hours had to get a post-test for all the CEs that they were doing for it. And it was very difficult. It was also very unclear in statute what a post-test required, how long it had to be, if you had to pass it, who wrote it, all that sort of thing. And so it also made it very difficult for the board to oversee. And so some of the changes that we made had to do with anything that was really making it complicated for the board to oversee particular aspects of it.
Mm-hmm. And it caused significant delays in applications, and so you weigh the real, I guess, value of this as a standard overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if it doesn't have a true value, then why would we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Jen, I just wanted to note, Jen, who's our Q&A person, it looks like there are a few questions that have come in, and they're up for me. They're showing up under the questions section. So I don't know if you're able to see that.
I'm not, so I can't see anything under questions or chats. And so I don't know if I need different settings or something.
All right, I'll take a look at that in a little bit. Otherwise, we'll just hold off. We'll get through all of our content, and then I'll do a quick review of them also.
Great.
Okay. All right, so in terms of next up, so in terms of applications, this is the last change related to applications. So if someone is licensed in another state, we changed some of the licensing by endorsement for folks. So people who are fully vetted in another state, they've received a license in another state. Once they come to Minnesota, we are basically accepting their licensure from another state, including supervision, verification and requirements, and any grandparenting that happened in the other state. Part of what was happening, folks, just for context, is I would get calls from practitioners and say, for example, one was a 20+ year clinician from New York who was moving to Minnesota. And this person had been in independent practice for over 20 years, had been, fully vetted, had been supervising other people, had been doing their job independently, moved to Minnesota, and did not meet our supervised practice requirements. So that person had to go receive 2 years of supervised practice, 20 plus years in. That made no sense at all. So part of what we cleaned up was this licensure by endorsement process to make it fair for people who are coming. Other states are doing the same thing in the hopes that if you leave Minnesota, that your license would still be worth the same licensure level in that other state. So again, every state's different in terms of licensure. Not every state has all levels of licensure. Minnesota does. So you still have to go off of each individual state and their requirements. But we're all trying to get on the same page. Any other thoughts, Kate?
This was, I think, one of our best examples of really reducing unnecessary barriers. Your example was perfect, and we heard those cases very, very often.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, the next set of changes is related to temporary licenses. So while people have temporary licensing, and let me just clarify what temporary license is for, because in light of COVID and the testing situation and whatnot, I've gotten lots of questions. I know the board has around, can I just get a temporary license? Temporary licenses are only for students or new graduates, and they're intended to cover administrative delays for higher ed transcripts so that the new grad can enter the workforce while they're waiting for their transcripts to be finalized and sent from their college or university. That's really what it was meant for. Temporary licenses for new grads require that the students or the new grad has to meet all of our permanent licensing requirements. So, and it's only valid for up to 6 months. So it's important for us to all remember that in order to have a temporary license, you still have to have taken the test and passed. We do not have a temporary license in Minnesota that allows you to practice without having taken the test and passed. Okay. This was also important for accreditation for grads from new programs or those higher ed programs that are going through reaccreditation. So again, one of those like background things that most of us don't have to worry about all the time. If you happen to be going to a school that is brand new or being reaccredited, we have a couple of those in Minnesota currently, it can put our graduates in a really strange position because they're it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. You have to be accredited in order to get your license, but you can't be accredited if you don't have grads who've gone through particular hoops and what. So all this helps fix that process. It's also for one other, well, there's a couple other changes. Let me just say, if you're licensed in another state, you can get a temporary license for 6 months once in any 12-month period. So if you're a snowbird and you travel across the country a few months out of the year and you want to practice in Minnesota on a temporary basis, maybe just in the summertime or maybe just in the winter because you love winter in Minnesota, you can get a temporary license every year for that purpose and not hold a permanent license. So that was just clarified in the statute that you can do that every year. It just wasn't clear in the statute. It was still true prior. The language was not super clear. The only repeal in this area was related to the teacher temporary license, and this was really meant for visiting professors. So if someone came from another country or another state and wanted to teach here for just 1 year, they could get this special teacher temporary license. The board had literally only had one applicant for that licensure level. So in order to just clean up our requirements and statutes and that sort of thing, that was repealed. Any thoughts on that, Kate? Can I keep moving?
Let me just clarify just a little bit, Karen, just to be clear with folks that with the repeal of the teacher license, that was the fourth different, very specific type of temporary license. There are still now 3. You described them, but just to really kind of call them out, the first one you talked about was for folks not licensed in any state who typically turn out to be our students, you know, who are able to get temporary licenses with the most important reason to have a temporary license is that you are waiting for your transcript. You're waiting for some final administrative thing to happen at the university, and that's what's sometimes holding things up from you getting the permanent license. So that is one type of temporary license. You did talk about the temporary license for that, kind of the good example is the snowbirds. That is for folks who have a permanent license in another state, and they might want to come here, practice for this time, limited short time, without getting the full permanent license. And then the third is the temporary license for students and graduates from programs that are still in CSWE candidacy status. So you kind of described all of them, but clearly there are three different types of temporary licenses. And again, overarching goal, just to, again, clarify, try to expedite those processes. So I think that those were good changes as well.
Yeah. Kate, and attendees, I just want to say real quick, I'm looking at the questions in the chat coming through so far, and lots of clarifying questions and things. I think what we'll do, just for time's sake, is keep moving through these slides so we cover all of the new things, and then we'll come back and address a whole bunch of these things. So, and if you didn't catch it earlier, folks, I just want to let you know that we'll be sharing all of these questions with the Board of Social Work, and they will take them into consideration when they continue their FAQs that they're developing that will be on their website. So there'll be answers to lots of these. If you don't get them today, they'll be coming as well. All right, in terms of continuing ed, this is our next big area of changes. So in terms of continuing ed, the changes are that for LICSW, there was a reduction in the clinical content requirement. So it used to be that you had to get 24 continuing ed hours in clinical content if you were an LICSW, and that has been dropped to 12. The reasoning for that is to allow more flexibility for practitioners, especially those who maybe have been in the field for a very long time and have other areas of their practice that they really want to focus on, maybe in one renewal cycle or another. So a particular cultural group, or I mean, just there's a myriad of things that we all want training in that changes and shifts over the course of our profession. So what this allows is just some flexibility for clinicians. You can still get as many of your, if you're working full time, you can get as many of those 40 CEs in clinical content as you want, as long as you still meet your ethics or supervision requirements. But now it doesn't restrict you so much in terms of having to get the full 24. In addition, all licensees, now again, the COVID variance overrides this for this next renewal period, basically. But for all licensees going forward, we've increased the number of CE hours allowed via independent learning to 50% of whatever your requirement is. So if you're working full time and you have to get 40, half of your continuing ed can be done through independent learning. And actually, in a few more slides, we're going to talk about what that independent learning can include. All right. I'm going to keep us. Yeah.
Karen, might I add just a couple of things? So again, when we're talking about these two changes, everybody, just to be very clear, this is tied to continuing ed at renewal. So this is renewal time. And just to be clear again, the current total of 40 hours did not change. The current 2 hours required in ethics did not change. And the current 6 hours required in supervision training, if you're an active licensing supervisor, did not change. But again, the context for this is at time of renewal.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Thanks for the clarification there. All right. In terms of license renewal, the big shift here is that you will no longer be getting a renewal card printed and sent to you in the mail. So you, beginning on August 1st, they won't be doing that any longer. This was actually a huge cost savings. Kate, you have some notes here about some exact numbers here. That's awesome. I'll let you share those, but just a note that wall certificates will still go out upon initial licensure. but those renewal cards won't be printed. People can still verify licensure for anyone. It's available 24/7 using the public license lookup. Any of us can use it, employers can use it, that sort of thing. So you don't have to show anyone that card. I don't remember ever pulling mine out of my folder, actually, so I don't know how useful they were, but maybe for some purposes. But this is a huge cost savings to the board. And as social workers, we have to remember that anything that saves the board money saves us money, because it is our license fees that are paid by us that funds the board. So this is one that I'm happy to give up in order to have some cost savings. So it looks like between postage and printing and that sort of thing, we're talking about $8,000 a year. So that's saved. I think that's pretty awesome. So I'm going to keep going. The other that is moved to an electronic format are our renewal notices. So this is really important for people. If you're used to getting your card in the mail that says it is time for you to renew, you will not receive that any longer. They will be sent via email only. So this will be beginning in fall of 2020. That date is not set yet. So this is not one of those. This is the only one that I'm aware of, Kate, that will wait until August. It won't be ready on August 1st. There's too much background stuff you need to fix in order to make this happen. Right. Okay, great. So the important thing for this, folks, is that you make sure that you have an updated email address on file with the board. So log into their online services to make sure that your contact information is all up to date so that you can make sure your renewal happens. It's also just important for everyone to remember, in my birthday month, every other year. So if it's my birthday month, and I'm like, wait, did I renew last year? That means it's probably time to renew. So that is a good indication for folks as well. The board's online services are also fantastic in terms of we can do just about everything now online. Kate, is that correct?
Yes,
just about. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
And Karen, I would just mention too, we will give folks fair warning, about when the change will occur. And again, the primary way that we will be giving folks notice is through that Gov Delivery subscription service. We're hoping maybe we can also mine, particular specific birth month renewal emails, but we will give folks fair warning. But again, just to help you and the board roll this out, I guess with minimal issues and hitches, update your email address is critically important. We'd appreciate that.
All right. I'm just switching here to fix Jen's allowances. So Jen, check and see if you can read the questions now. All right, folks, we're moving into alternate license statuses. So next section, this is a little complicated for folks who don't know anything about it or care anything about it. It only, many of these only apply to a few of us. But it's important for us to all hear that they're available also for potentially later if you need them. So we have a couple changes to our alternate license statuses, and there were a couple questions in the chat about these. So make sure you're listening if you're one of those folks. These are for people who are on an alternate status or looking for one. Those include temporary leave, emeritus inactive, or emeritus active. So the emeritus is another way of saying retired. Okay, so these are those people who are sort of retiring, who want to still stay connected and do some sorts of things, okay? So what this slide is talking about is that you can only change from an active status or regular license status to one of these other alternate statuses when it's time for your renewal. So it streamlines the process for the board, it's more economical, and it keeps our licensees on track with your renewal dates. So say you're retiring, but you'd like to move to emeritus status, you keep with what you have until it's your renewal time, and then you can switch, okay? The second thing about alternate statuses, this is about the emeritus active in particular. So people who are semi-retired in that license status. What we've changed is that there's no limit to the amount of volunteer or pro bono work that you can do. And it increases the number of the maximum hours you can do of paid work from 240 hours a year to 500 a year. So for some people, that 240 was just a difficult barrier because of the amount of hours per month that you were trying to do in some paid practice. And for a lot of people, it was only licensing supervision. Okay, what had been a law was 240 hours of licensing supervision only. What we've changed it to be is 3 things that are allowed for our emeritus active people: licensing supervision, providing consultation, and for presenting continuing education. So if you'd like to present continuing ed workshops through NASW or through anyone else and get paid for it, you can do that under an emeritus licensure status. Just a couple little notes to this, folks. Why would someone want the emeritus status? It is a little cheaper at renewal, and you don't have to get as many CEs. So that's kind of the main reason why people move to an emeritus status. The other thing I like to note is this thing about providing consultation. Folks, in our licensing law, it is required that all of us as social workers get ongoing consultation for our work. And often when I do ethics trainings, I talk about how important it is that you continue to get good consultation and supervision after those 2 years of required supervision. And so one of the reasons that we did this is to help encourage people who are retired or retiring, moving toward retirement, to continue to play that consultation role for other practitioners, especially people who are in very independent practice or siloed and the only social worker in the place. And so when you're in kind of a host setting like that, it can be difficult. And so this is one of those ways that we're supporting that ongoing work.
Karen,
Yeah.
Oops, I'm sorry. Can I jump in for just a couple of things?
Sure.
In terms of the emeritus active license, the one that Karen is talking about now, again, the capacity has been expanded. And again, the rationale is we all want to keep these seasoned, well-trained licensed social workers somehow connected to the workforce and licensees. I mean, I don't think any of us can afford to lose that brain trust, and for them to have a capacity to still contribute, as Karen said, in sort of a semi-retired way, with a 50% reduction in licensing fee and a 50% reduction in the required CE. So for those of you who want to continue to be involved, but just not in sort of a full-time capacity, this really is, quite frankly, it's a very unique licensing option. So I'll give that one a plug. And then Karen, can you just back up just to the previous slide? Sure. I just wanted to highlight, okay, so the board has these 3 particular, we call them alternate license statuses. So essentially all of them mean that you're sort of putting your full active license on hold for, within some degree. So just very quickly, for the temporary leave, this is a license status whereby you can put your license on hold for up to 4 full years. And, you can think of examples, any number of examples where folks need to just step out of the workforce, but they intend to go back. And the benefit of this is that you pay 1 renewal fee to cover 4 years rather than paying the fee every 2 years. But on temporary leave, you can't practice. There's a prohibition on practice. You're really sort of, you're taking a hiatus and stepping out of practice. Emeritus inactive is if you are ready to completely retire. No practice is allowed on this one as well. And that's why we have this, I just think this emeritus active, sort of half capacity, semi-retired license status is just a wonderful hybrid. You don't want to practice full out, but you want to be contributing in some capacity and still be able to earn a bit of an income. So that's kind of a quick description of, sort of what they are. And again, much more description on our website.
Great.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Kate. In terms of reactivation reactivation. So if your license has expired or you've been in an alternate status, so the ones we were just talking about, temporary leave, emeritus, active or inactive, and you want to reactivate, it will be required that you do 2 hours in ethics and complete this new Know Your Licensing Law online learning service, which will be starting soon. We're thinking, was it fall, Kate? Something like that.
Yes, it should be late fall.
Okay, so basically what this is, folks, is it's kind of a quiz about our licensing laws, and it will be available online. It's free, anyone can do it, but there's one reason one time in statute now where it will be required for people to complete it, and that will be if you let your license expire or you're on an alternate status and going back to permanent regular status. And that's just to make sure you're up on all of the current requirements for licensure. The advisory committee of the board was very active in giving ideas and direction and that sort of thing for this, and it will be overseeing the whole kind of the questions and that sort of thing. So I don't want people to be scared of it. It's just meant to be, I think for faculty and for new students, it'll be a fun way to just kind of test your knowledge about our licensing laws. No high stakes, nothing like, it's not going to affect your licensure, that sort of thing. And if your license expires, yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Sorry, you know, just to be clear about that, because when we started to talk about it, people were a little nervous. You know, what really does this mean? And again, where Karen says this is not a high stakes exam, this is a learning tool. And again, it's going to be an open book exam. I shouldn't say exam. It's going to be an open book online learning service. And you're able to earn free CE. It's completely free. You can do it at your leisure. You know, and the goal is just to have people be more familiar with licensing regulations.
Absolutely. So that will be coming in the next few months. I think the other good reason that this was changed up a little bit was that some people, if they let their license expire and then they went to reactivate, they would have to make up for potentially years of continuing ed that they didn't do, and that can be really a problem for folks. And so this was to help clarify the process and get rid of some unnecessary barriers and that sort of thing. So if your license expires, you have a 1-year window to reactivate. Otherwise, you do start from scratch. And so I do like to put that warning out there to folks, like you don't want to let your license expire. This is not oh, I'll just let it expire and then all I have to do is 2 CEs. You know, you also have to take the test and pay all the money and do all of the hoops and get your fingerprints done and all the things like you're getting licensure for the first time. So expiration's not a great idea. Do it in that window if you can. So that's my caveat on that. I'm going to keep us moving quickly, Kate, because there are tons and tons of questions coming in, and we have a few more slides to get through. One other significant change in the new legislation is the board member qualifications. So members of the Board of Social Work there are 15 of them, 10 are licensed social workers and 5 are public members. So of those 10, the requirements had been basically set in 1997 and had been the same since then, but hadn't changed related to the number of licensees we had at each licensure level. So now we reran the numbers of how many licensees we have at each level and then basically set the numbers based on that. So based on our number of licensees, we'll have 3 LSWs, 2 LICSWs, and 2 LG or LI. And we'll have 3, what Kate likes to call wild cards. So these are members of any license type, okay? And what I want to add with that is that under our board member qualifications, there's some additional requirements that have to be met for the board composition. So for the full 15 people on the board, for the 10 licensees, there was some updates to the practice setting requirements. So where it used to be like 1 hospital person and a nursing home person, but there was always a question like, where does long-term care fit between those? So we changed it to a healthcare setting. So just some clarity in terms of chunking areas of practice to make it more, I would say, easier to find board members that fit the required needs for the board. There were also, for all 15 board positions, there's been an addition of this underrepresented community or qualification, in addition to communities of color qualification, to ensure that other diverse groups of Minnesotans are covered by openings on our board. There's also a requirement that has been there and is staying the same, that 7 members of the 15-member board have to be outside of the 11 county metro area. So as you can imagine, folks, this was very tricky for the governor's office to be making decisions about who was placed on the board when they're trying to do this special little math of, we need this many LSWs, they have to live outside the Twin Cities, and they have to work in a hospital to meet all of the requirements that are left. This is the one person we can have, so instead of and I don't think it's going to be maybe not easy, but hopefully easier to get good qualified applicants. And we always at NASW, we always send out when there are openings on the board and the window is open for people to apply, we send those out, and the board does that consistently as well. So if you're getting that gov delivery that we were talking about earlier, you'll be, we'll let you know when those happen. And I hope some of you will think about throwing your hat in the ring for those openings on the board as well. All right, now we are going to go over just a handful of FAQs, which will answer some of the questions I'm seeing coming in, and then we're going to turn to questions from the audience. So again, all changes are effective August 1st. Related to that, Kate, I've seen one question come in, which is specific to the 2-year timeline with the, I should go back to the question so I get it right. The 2-year variance, is it possible that some people would renew twice in that 2-year variance? Maybe if they had already renewed or are renewing? I don't even know if I have a question in there. There's a question related to.
Don't believe that should be the case. I would not think anybody wants to renew twice in a 2-year period, because they're set up on 24-month renewal cycles. Someone may change a license type and renew.
Sure, that might be true. Okay, yep. So it's just during that period. And I think, folks, the other thing is we're not going to be able to answer everything available under the sun. At the end here, we're going to have a couple of pages that have contact information for us, as well as where you can find all kinds of written information about all of these things as well.
And all right, Karen, can I jump in with just one other thing too? In terms of hearing you say we can't answer everything today under the sun, I would really, I would really ask for everybody who is watching today that if you do have questions that aren't answered specifically, to please wait for things to get posted at the website and not phone us. We are actually at only about 30% capacity because of COVID, and it is really difficult for staff to be able to manage processing things and respond to phone calls, phone inquiries. The volume has just skyrocketed, and with my staff who are teleworking, quite frankly, not everybody has the capacity to get phone calls. So I would really request that. My staff prompted me several times to put that ask out to you. So if you can just try to be patient and continue to go to the website, we will push information out.
Great. All right, so Kate had put together 3 different FAQs that are things we know we will hear about from people. So the first one is basically, I'm due to renew my LICSW after August 1st. How much clinical content do I need? So basically, you can go by the old requirements or the new ones, because the requirements just give you more flexibility. So if you've already earned your 24, you're good. If you haven't, and you'd like to go by the new requirements and the 12, you are just fine to do that as well. The next one, I'm due to renew my license after August 1st. How much independent learning can I report? This one's a little tricky. The new requirements for ongoing will be 50% of whatever your required number of CE hours is. However, in light of the the COVID variants, all of your CEs through February of 2022 can be earned via independent learning. So in this section, I want to just talk a little bit about the details on that. I get lots of questions. I'm sure the board gets lots of questions about that. So independent learning is basically online activities without live interaction, okay? Any online activities without live interaction or research for publication, presentation, or professional development. So basically, so many things count, folks. So you can read a book, you can watch TED Talks, you could watch documentaries, you could go down an online rabbit hole, starting with some article you read in CNN and then being like, what does that mean for my clients? And you start reading about this and that, you go down that little rabbit hole, that time counts. Even if a presenter is not pre-approved by the Board of Social Work, I like to make sure everyone remembers that in Minnesota, by law, even though some CEs have that little thing on them that says pre-approved for 2 CEUs from the Board of Social Work, that means that they've gone through some level of a vetting process by the Board of Social Work and are an approved provider. It does not mean that those are the only ones you can attend. So if you've watched a presenter at your place of worship, at a community site, at anything related to the Black Lives Matter movement, that, I mean, there's been some fantastic presenters out there on all kinds of things. All of those count, including webinars, all kinds of online learning, that sort of thing. So all of that can be independent learning. The only thing that's not are basically, live things. So anything that's live, either a webinar or in-person sorts of learning, if and when we ever get back to that, those aren't counted as independent because they're live. Everything else you do is independent. In terms of documentation, I get this a lot, like, what do I have to do to prove that I did it then? And you need to keep some kind of written summary on file. The board's rule is to keep it on file for 1 year past your renewal date. I was joking with Kate when we talked about this that I have all of my CE backup since 1999 when I was first licensed in my files here in my office. So it is all there if she ever wants to look at it, but she said we only have to keep it for a year. What you should keep track of for independent learning, since often, you don't have a flyer from the event, doesn't say the number of CEs, you don't have a certificate, that sort of thing, totally fine. You should track for yourself what you did. So that includes, I was online doing web searching, this sort of thing. I read these articles, maybe list them out. The topic, the applicability to your practice, the date, title, authors, that sort of thing. Keep track of how long it took. How much time did you spend reading that thing, watching that thing, that kind of detail, and then how it helps maintain, improve, or enhance your competent social work practice. So jot some notes to yourself, and it doesn't have to be lengthy. It doesn't have to be full sentences even. It can be bullet points, but jot for yourself some notes about, watching this webinar, or not webinar, sorry, watching this pre-recorded webinar or watching this documentary or TED Talk really helped me think about XYZ for my practice, okay? That's all you have to keep note of. And then take that little piece and stick it in your licensure file for the next couple of years and keep it for a year past when you renew, all right? Okay, so there's our little learning on independent learning. In terms of where you can learn more, the Board of website has all of the new legislation on it. There's a couple of fact sheets there. There's some pieces that are comparisons, side-by-side comparisons of what used to be and what's new, that sort of thing. So you can look at that. You can read the full statute, which we'd love for you to read and see how much clearer it is to navigate through. And you can also click the link here to subscribe to the e-learning. All of these links will be available in the slides, which we will post with the YouTube, and we will send out to everyone who's on this as well. Just a couple of things for housekeeping, just to say again before we switch into some more Q&A. You will all, if you're on this right now or you've watched a chunk of it today with us live, you will get your CEs emailed to you. Please be patient with us. It might take us into next week to get you your CE certificate. But you will receive that as well as a little survey about what you thought of today's session. We encourage you to do that. Again, this session has been recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel, and both the board and NASW will be handing that out prolifically. We will make sure anyone who is registered for today's session receives that link. So if people weren't able to watch it, they will receive the link. Again, this is a free session, so you're welcome to share it with anyone and everyone who cares. Jen, before we move into other Q&A, were there any other housekeeping things people were asking about again that we could answer quickly?
So I think that you just covered all of them. Lots of questions about the PowerPoint. It sounds like it will get sent out.
Absolutely. All right, Jen, can you work us through some areas of questions that you're getting?
Yeah, and so we'll start with the ones that most people had, that a lot of people had questions on. So lots of requests for clarification about registration for people who are licensed in other states and the specific process for that. And some people gave specific examples that I don't know are necessary here, but just kind of the general process.
Okay, can you share just the general process people have to go through?
Yes, and Jen, I'm wondering, can you tell for context, is this around that special provision to provide the time-limited telehealth under the executive order? Is that what, just to be clear?
Yes, and so there's people from asking about other states and also asking for clarification if they have to take the test again or if it's a different process.
Oh, okay. There's probably a couple of levels here. So first of all, you know, when I hear registering, again, we did talk a little bit about under the special COVID provisions, the governor issued an executive order for licensed mental health providers from other states to register with the board without getting fully licensed to provide telehealth services here to Minnesota residents. You know, so just know that that's for folks who are licensed outside of Minnesota. That's time limited, specific to COVID. Chances are that may not be what this question is really about. So let me take the other angle. The question, as you're kind of giving me information, I think could very well be more connected to endorsement as a licensing process. And so with endorsement, we touched on that briefly. The new law really does provide more flexibility. And so again, endorsement is a way to earn a permanent license here in Minnesota. You must be licensed in a different state and hold a comparable kind of license that we have in Minnesota. For example, you're an LICSW in Utah. You want to become licensed in Minnesota, either to move here physically in practice or to provide telehealth services. We're just seeing an increase in the number of folks who need to be licensed in multiple states to do telehealth work. But in this case, again, limited to endorsement, and under the new law, what we are requiring is a comparable license. We are honoring the supervised practice that you have done in your other state to satisfy Minnesota requirements. So for example, I think we most commonly see the LICSW license via endorsement, people sort of transferring about at the clinical level. So for example, honoring your supervised practice, Minnesota requires 4,000 hours. If your home state required 3,000, 3,200, 3,600, because it varies across the country, we are going to honor that. You are not going to be required to earn that additional supervised practice if your state required 3,600. In addition, you are not going to have to provide written verification of the supervised practice from your supervisor in Utah, practice you probably did 20 years ago, and you would have a very difficult time providing that written evidence. So that is one way that we've reduced a barrier. You will have to submit an official transcript. You will have to submit an official license verification from your home state board that will generally verify the exam you've taken, when your license was issued, what license you have, if you've had discipline. So we are requesting that level of evidence to demonstrate your comparability in the standards that you met. We are not going to be requiring that you submit the official score report transfer from ASWB. In most cases, your verification is going to call out that you took that exam in order to be licensed. And so again, we are not going to require sort of the duplicate, triplicate verification of those qualifications. So the process will definitely be easier. Yes, Karen.
Good. I'm just going to stop you and say there are so many questions in here. I think we're going to go for short, brief answers and tell people, especially for some of the, I mean, there is so much depth in all of this. So I do think, you know, it does not supersede people calling the board or emailing the board or dealing with their individual things. I think, you know, we're trying to make it easier. It's not an automatic that you just get licensed in Minnesota. What you're saying is you still have to go through all of the requirements, but you won't have to duplicate work that you had done years ago or, you know, do things that you were never required to do either.
Yep, absolutely.
Jen, is there another bucket of questions that you're seeing from folks?
Yeah, and so some timeline questions. So one of which is people who are set to renew in July, just confirming that that means that it's the old guidelines that they are following for that.
Yeah.
And then the other question is, so for the independent learning, it goes through February 2022. What about people who renew later in 2022? Can they just do all of their independent learning and get that done before February and still count it?
Ooh,
that was the question I
no
seen before.
That is a very good question. And I would say no to that because the variance was approved based on renewal date. When your license needs to be renewed when it expires, it was not based on when you accrue those hours. So the answer to that one would be no.
So if someone renews after February of 2022, then it's back to the new standard, which is 50% of your CE can be done through independent learning.
You know, that's one, I mean, now I'm finding my brain ticking.
Can you look into that and put it out in the FAQs?
Yeah, we will do that because, yes, we will do that.
Make sure it's crystal clear for folks.
Yep, we will do that.
Thank you.
So are there any changes to the categories or tracking for the 360 clock hours?
No, no changes to categories, no changes to tracking. Just again, there is that change to the independent learning portion of that. Categories are the same.
Thank you.
And so a couple of questions about grandfathering into the LICSW and if there's the possibility that any grandfathering would happen for any circumstances.
At this point in time, I would say that no, there are no provisions for that. I would say the only remote possibility probably for another grandfathering period would be if the county licensing exemption were removed. Historically, as the board has removed an exemption, there has been a grandfathering to help ease the change on the affected parties who are employed in those types of agencies. But that is still to be determined, you know, and not to be confused with when we talked about that through endorsement. It's a very different kind of situation.
All right.
I'm seeing one I can answer here, Jen, related to the 7 organizations that this person had asked, 7 organizations that NASW seeks feedback from. And I would say NASW seeks feedback from lots of organizations. And we have partners, both policy partners and coalition partners. But I think what you're asking about is the advisory committee I was talking about. And that's actually the Board of Social Work's advisory committee. So NASW is one of the members. It's also, let me try them, Kate, the Hmong Social Work Association, the Black Social Work Association, the Home Care Association, the Nursing Home Association, the Clinical Society. I'm missing somebody.
Council on Social Work Education.
Council on Social Work Education and the School Social Work Association.
That's correct. There's also a representative from tribal organizations. And
Yes.
all of that information is posted at our website. The representatives are named, the organization is named, and that is the perfect stump the presenter question, right?
There's also, folks, there's also a group called the Coalition of Licensed Social Workers, which is a completely separate group. The Coalition is actually the group in Minnesota of associations that came together to work and get licensure in the first place in our state. And the Coalition is still strong. That group also has a seat at the table for the advisory committee. There are two groups that are not a part of the Coalition. That we can talk about that completely separate, but I'd be happy to talk with anyone about work with the Coalition or the Advisory Council if you'd like to have a conversation offline about that. All right, Jen, and folks, it is 1:32. I just want to say that we are technically at our time, but Kate and I will stay for a few minutes and answer a few more questions. So feel free to jump off whenever it makes sense for you. And like I said, we will go ahead and share all of these questions with the board and ask them to answer as many as they can in their FAQs that are coming out. And if you have to leave us, I'm going to say goodbye now, but we'll continue on for another 10 minutes or so and answer a few more questions as long as we need.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
So Kate, there's some questions about people not being able to log into the system to be submitting forms online or struggling to reset their password. Is there a number to call, or what would be your advice for people who are struggling to be able to get in?
Yeah, that one I believe does have to come straight to our staff. We don't have tech support for that. Perhaps the best, I think that may have to be an email or a phone call. I know that some of the things that affect it, I know, are the browser that you're using. We've got some general descriptions, you know, just in terms of to make the experience a little better, easier. You know, but I know that we have had some tech problems throughout, and people generally phone or email.
Jen, I want to react to a couple of things I'm seeing in the questions regarding the licensure exams. There were actually, it looks like they came in related to the exams, our social work licensing exams being difficult, especially for people to color to pass. And that the exams are based on kind of a Eurocentric perspective, and that, you know, the concern is that this is not addressed. And let me just say up front that this is absolutely talked about and has been talked about many, many times with CSWE, with ASWB, with the people who, you know, ASWB is the Association of Social Work Boards. They're the ones that own the tests, sort of, right?
Yes.
They oversee the test. They're the ones who do the research on the test, who say it's valid, reliable, all the things, right? But we all know from practice experience that it is more difficult for some to pass than others. I want to say one thing, in Minnesota, we do have an alternate license for people who were born in another country and who don't speak English as their first language. If they have taken the test and failed it, they can apply through, remind me the right words, Kate, so I say the right thing.
A provisional license.
A provisional license, thank you. So this is our provisional license. Minnesota is one of only a couple of states that has anything like it, that allows you to get a license in our state without having passed the test. Again, our provisional license only for people who are English as a second language, who were born in another country, and they have to have failed the test once in order to apply for it. So I'd be happy to share the information about that. It's all on the Board of Social Work's website as well. Was our state's response to some of that frustration around the exam and it being difficult for particular groups to pass. That said, I'm super aware of that conversation. I promise you that NASW at the national level has been having that conversation and continues to have that conversation with ASWB in present day. That is a valid concern. We have a licensing committee at our national office that I'm a member of, and that is something that's on our work plan this year as well, to continue that that work. So again, it's nothing we can do anything about. It's nothing our Minnesota Board of Social Work can do anything about directly, but it's something that people are definitely talking about. Again, if you're interested, if you're an NASW member and you'd like to be on our licensure committee to talk more about that, or just want to talk with me about it, just please reach out as well.
Yeah,
and Jen,
I'm sorry,
ahead, Kate.
just to add really quickly, the board is certainly committed to trying to help ensure a diverse workforce. I mean, that goes without saying. And the national licensing exam that ASWB develops and maintains, there really is a very rigorous process involved. So many steps, very diverse exam raters trying to ensure that there is not any bias. They have information posted to their website as well. You know, if folks want more information about how the exam is created, where those questions come from, who's involved. I mean, I can certainly offer that. And, you know, I know that this is a kind of an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, and I want to add one more thing to that, Kate, because I think that's a really important thing you brought up, which is the exam writers, the item writers for the exam are social workers. So SWB has this pool of people, many of whom are professors, some of whom are people of color. They do try really hard to have that pool be a very diverse pool of people, and they're the people who write the questions. So it's not like
So Karen, I think we might have lost you.
this group of white people can do that. Oh, shoot. I'm talking to myself and I sound great, but it sounds like
Yeah,
maybe somewhere along here now, Jen.
And
Yes.
I will just maybe to wrap that up, you know, again, there is a really rigorous process. All of the exam questions are tested, they're vetted, they're monitored statistically for any bias, sort of failure to work well. I think that's the one thing that most people don't know a whole lot about the process. And that might
and all that said,
information.
in the statistics, and I'm close to my PhD and I believe in the statistics, and I also really struggle with standardized tests and believe that it can also be true that it's difficult for some people to pass these particular sets of exams. So all that, and we can keep working on it. We can absolutely keep working on it. Jen, other things we should cover today?
So there's kind of one other question group that a lot of people were asking about, and that's the emeritus status. And just for some clarification of whether or not you can be providing clinical services and if it has to be under 500 hours annually, and some of the parameters around that.
Okay, so Jen, I think you're talking about the emeritus active, again, the semi-retired. Now, remember, there are certain types of services that can be provided. You can do all the volunteer work and all the pro bono work that your heart desires. You cannot do that for pay. And secondly, the only kinds of services you can provide, again, it's the supervision for licensure, consultation as needed, and providing continuing education. So with that said, you really can't be doing clinical therapy services for pay.
So even on the emeritus active status, you can't still have a couple of clients that you see and keep your little clinical practice running. You cannot do that.
I would say no. I would say no.
Okay.
Not under the language of the statute.
Great.
It calls out very specifically what types of practice, if you will, or what services you can do that you can earn income for.
But if someone is only working part-time, they would only have to incur CEUs at a part-time rate. Is that true for under a regular license status?
No. If you have a full active license, even if you are working full-time or working at all in any capacity, 5, 10, 7 hours a month, then full active status license requirements apply, full CE.
Full CE. The only caveat to that, I love this, I like to prompt you.
Yeah.
The caveat to that is supervision. So if you're a new
That's
clinician
correct.
or new practitioner and you're in your 2 years of supervised practice and you're working less than full time, you have to get less than the full number of supervision hours when you're not working full time. But your CEs are all still required during that time.
That is correct. You are right about that. Supervision is according to that formula, and so less practice, less supervision. They go hand in hand.
That's
Yeah,
not
thanks
C-
for that.
Okay. Yep.
It
Jen,
takes you
anything?
longer to finish, but
Right. Yes,
Yep.
we should cover.
So I think that that's the big categories of questions. There's some other kind of more nuanced that seems like it's pretty specific to people's personal situations. But I
Okay.
think that we got through most of them. There's some people who are very appreciative of both of you and the collaboration between the Board of Social Work and NASW, and a lot of positive feedback coming in as well.
Awesome. So let me close us out. I want to say thank you so much to the over 200 of you who've stuck in with us till the very end here. Again, we will get the recording all tied up and get that posted for folks. You're welcome to share it extensively. These changes will be in effect as of August 1st, and the board and NASW will be coming out with lots more information about that. But I think, as always, go to the board for ongoing questions, use their website when you're looking for answers to things. So much is available now online, and know that they are very responsive to us. So if they see lots of questions coming in about something, they'll add an FAQ. It helps them also along the way. So thank you all for being with us today. Kate, I would just want to thank you so much for joining us once again to help make this super clear for licensees and help it not be that big scary changes thing that we're all worried about, like what am I going to miss? That's why over 800 people said, hey, I want to join this webinar. I don't want to miss anything. So thank you so much for helping continue to put it into plain language for us and make it very accessible along the way. And thank you to Jen, our board chair, for joining us and being our Q&A person today. I appreciate you. And to all of you with us, I wish you a great summer, and I hope that you will get engaged with NASW if you're not yet, that you'll join, that you will get engaged with our chapter, that you will help us move this work forward for our profession in Minnesota. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much.